Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Judicial Responsibility, Ethically Engaging with Survivors of Sex Trafficking. My name is Fedora Preston Haynes. I'm a site manager with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and we also have Cassandra Johnson, Senior Program Manager. First, we'd like to start with our introductions of our presenters. We have Jordan Masciangelo and Shanna Parker, and I'll turn it over to Jordan.
Hey everyone, morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Jordan Masciangelo. I am a lived experience consultant. I'm in anti-human trafficking field, and I also serve as the creative director at Men Healing. We are an organization dedicated to helping provide community and resources for male survivors of any kind of sexual trauma. So we do a lot of work with adult survivors, actually, but my focus is on helping folks like everyone here understand the intersections of being a survivor and everything else that goes on in their lives. And especially for male survivors, the intersections of masculinity, ideals, and concepts with the trauma experience. So thanks for having me. And I'll hand it over to Shauna. Sorry.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you today. My name is Shanna Parker. I am out of Arizona. I am the CEO and founder of Angels Go to Work. I work directly with juveniles who have experienced sex trafficking. I work with them one-on-one, and I work with their teams, which would be their Department of Child Safety teams, probation, their other behavioral health teams, and the court teams as well. I help build our collaborative here in Arizona, where we have a strength court, strength DCS units, and strength probation units. And these are all focused on the population of children that are being trafficked here in Arizona. I do work nationally on a couple of different areas. And so my daytime is here working with kids. And then I do various things across the country, various trainings and program buildings and things like that. But I'm really excited to talk to you today about ethically engaging with survivors of trafficking, because there is a right way to do everything, right? And we want to be successful in this. And we found that, we're about 25 years into this now. And so we've learned some things about how to work together more effectively so that we can have better results, better outcomes. And so that's really what we're here to talk about today. Next slide. And my apologies for the next slide. When you're on a webinar, sometimes you don't get to control the mouse. So we will have to say that. This is our disclaimer for OJJDP. Next slide. So I put this in here, the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. This is the base of why we do what we do. And I have been surprised to hear from a number of individuals that they have never actually read the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. It has been updated numerous times. There are, numerous updates to it, but this is the basic shortened version. And so this is what we're looking for whenever we're working with individuals. Do they meet the Trafficking Victim Protection Act base of what a victim of sex trafficking means? And so you can look that up. If you're into reading those things in the long form, it is definitely there for you. You'll see a lot of the intricacies that law has been able to determine about this situation. So I encourage you to look that up. Next slide. So where are these kids coming from? We know that a large number of them do come from growing up in child protective care. It breaks down the family unit, and then we also see them coming from the single parent families, also affluent families, substance affected families, families with generational trafficking, the migrant families. developmental disabilities. We see that all the time, in the kids that we're working with. And I know from working across the country that we're seeing the same types of things in most of our states. So they're coming from everywhere. I say this across the country and I'll say it today. Where there is humans, there is human trafficking. And so there is no situation that you can look at where you can say, oh, it's definitely not happening here. Because I guarantee you, you'll hear that almost everywhere it's happening. Next slide. So the difference between these are the three major forms of trafficking. These are not the only forms of trafficking. Trafficking happens in various ways. It is multifaceted and multi-layered at the same time. So in commercial trafficking, what we generally see is a pimp-controlled situation. It could be an individual who is walking in an area that's known for prostitution. We generally call that the Blade. It could be posting ads. We all have heard of Backpage in the past. Backpage is no more. That has, spawned out into literally 100 different smaller places where you can place ads to sell an individual. And then also those private parties. In familial trafficking, we see that related to various things. A lot of people immediately think about the substance-related issue and the poverty issue. It is not just substance-related and poverty. We have had families that are affluent families that are sharing their children amongst each other. And this is a form of trafficking. And then, of course, on the labor side, what we typically see in the younger populations, because that's, my general focus, those door-to-door magazine sales. Sometimes we'll see kids get caught up in those. They're generally a flyer where they call a number, and they will also offer them to live in a house. And so they give them a place to stay, but they are labor trafficking these kids and some young adults. And of course, we know that in our agriculture and sometimes moving companies and industries like that, you can see some labor trafficking going on. Next slide, please. So the difference. In familial trafficking, it's generally going to be known individuals that are going to be connected in that situation. It is one of the hardest to uncover because, what happens in the family stays in the family. And, families kind of traditionally protect themselves, from what's going on, or protect others from being able to see what's going on inside families where things like that are happening. And so sometimes we're looking at indicators from the kids to give us those red flags to be able to look into those situations. Of course, with the commercial trafficking, you're going to see more of those commercial advertisements in the same way you would see anyone market, a plate of food. They will be marketing humans in that same form. But we will find them bars, casinos, strip clubs, private parties. You will also see familial commercial trafficking. This is where we have a parental figure or a family member that's acting as a parental figure. It could be a sibling. It could be a grandparent. It could be an aunt, cousin, whatever. But this time they take it a step further and they're moving into that commercial element where they're actually posting the ads and meeting up and putting these information out on those underground websites where they can start making those connections with individuals. Oftentimes we'll see if it's multiple kids in the household, we'll see the oldest be the one that kind of operates as a bottom. A bottom is where you see in a trafficking situation where you have a pimp. A bottom would be his assistant, if you will. And so oftentimes the oldest is groomed into that position when you see that there's multiple kids in the household. So you'll see some blame shifting over to that older sibling. And I've seen this in a handful of cases. But The lack of reporting or the late reporting, because they move around so much, kind of perpetuates this and keeps it going. Jordan, what would you add to this situation?
Yeah, I like to interject just for a second here in Shauna's during Shauna's slides, because for male survivors, there is often a lot of us are looking for what Shauna's talking about. That's what a lot of the people in this field are looking for. And not that that doesn't happen with male survivors, because it absolutely does. But there does seem to be, in my experience, working with male survivors, in my own experience, there's a lot of reasons why male survivors do fall through the cracks. But part of that is that we are not traditionally found in sort of these systems of, like Shauna's speaking here, necessarily. There's a lot of exploitation that goes on with the trafficker. There's masculinity exploitation. There's often the lover boy technique. It's less about the pimp. There's less of a pimp control structure. It's less organized, if you know what I mean. I was trafficked with only one other person. There was I only saw one other person. So there's not a there wasn't like a system for someone to even follow. There was no one to look for, to investigate. So I do like to point it out that they call it like the lover boy technique, or the intimate partner trafficker, or whatever. Often it's a situation like that. If it's a young male with an older male, or what the case may be, but that's what you're often seeing. You're not seeing sort of necessarily the same sorts of structures that we are looking for typically when it comes to trafficking. And so for me, I just like for everyone to go a little bit deeper and think about these signs. If you turn them inward a little bit, males are less often trafficked across state lines, across country lines, things like that. So we need to look a little bit more locally and inward sometimes, rather than thinking of it as this huge criminal organization, which of course it is. This is not to say everything that Shauna is talking about also happens to men. But I have only met two guys in my life, and I've worked in this field for 15 years, where they have been like in a structured situation, a structured trafficking situation. So thanks, Shauna. Go ahead.
Well, one of the examples that I like to utilize, one of the kids that I had, it was a 15-year-old male who was being trafficked by his mother to another older woman who lived in the apartment complex. And so we've seen a lot of conduct issues coming out of this young man, and people weren't really uncovering what was going on behind the scenes, behind those conduct issues that we were seeing from him. So he was already in the courts, but no one knew that this situation existed. It was actually a fight between the mother and the woman that he was being trafficked to, that the police ended up coming out that day, and one of the patrol officers just caught a statement that the mother said. And that was what opened up the investigation. And we learned that this young man was actually being trafficked to this other woman in the apartment complex for small things.
Yeah, how it works though. A lot of the times they're being investigated for something else, and then
Mhm.
they uncover this. And I can't tell you how many times when I was living with my trafficker, how many times I pulled the fire alarm in the building, in cry for help. Every time the fire people would come in, they wouldn't even look twice. And I'm
Yeah.
screaming in my eyes, but they're not looking for that. You know what I mean? Because they're like, oh, I don't. You're just you just like daddies. You're like older guys or something. So just to sort of open your awareness a little bit more when we're thinking about this, because we need to really uh, think about it as a gender neutral situation. It's hard because traditionally this is what we know, but that's why we're here, to sort of expand everyone's awareness a little bit, some of this stuff.
Right. It might be predominantly female, but it is not exclusively female by any stretch of the imagination. And as we, initially, whenever the country started looking at this as a whole, we were really only focused on pimp control trafficking, so that commercial trafficking. People did not even really understand or believe that familial trafficking existed. And so now we've gotten to a point where we know for sure familial trafficking exists, and it is a huge problem in our country. And I think that that's what we're going to be creeping up on next, is we're going to be able to see, by the courts and other, service providers and individuals opening things up, we're going to be able to see that male population is actually a bigger population than what we think.
I think
Um,
that the United Nations put out their study, and it was 40%. I mean, this is including of labor trafficking, labor and sex trafficking, but 40% of all trafficking survivors worldwide are male identified. So that's not a small percent. It's not a tiny little percentage. It's almost
Not
half.
at all. Not at all. Let's go to the next slide. So this is why we're here today. Knowledge is truly power. Because when you can't protect anyone from something that you don't even know exists, right? And then once you find out it exists, we need to know how. How does it exist? How does it operate? How does it integrate, into these children's lives? How does it show itself, right? Those are the things that we learn from talking with each other and, gathering education and getting those trainings. And we always want to move beyond the 101. It is wonderful to have that 101 training. We also, want to make sure that we have trauma-informed trainings. That is always good. However, that doesn't teach you a whole lot about trafficking, the trauma-informed trainings. It teaches you, how to treat a person, of course, but you've got to take a step further to be able to pick up that extra knowledge to understand what's going on. Now, your level of training should match your level of contact or authority over these children that we have in our court system. So if you're having, regular daily contact with these juveniles, then I would anticipate that you would need a larger amount of training. If you are on the peripheral, maybe you're a judicial assistant, and it's good for you to have this information, but maybe you don't work directly with the kiddos, and so maybe not as much training. You do always want to make sure that at least some of your trainings are survivor-led trainings so that you can get that lived experience knowledge. And you want to get it from different individuals, right? Because Jordan knows a lot of things that I don't know and never experienced. I know a lot of things that Jordan doesn't know and never experienced. And so that's why it's good to go to multiple resources. And there's a good handful of us, out here across the country, doing trainings. And so we want to make sure that, we are getting the trainings from the right individuals. Academia is great. They have put together some good information. Your 101s are probably going to be really great coming from academia. But if you're leveling up from there, I highly recommend that you have a survivor involved training because sometimes the language is what's missing between academia and what we understand, right? And so helping you understand the type of language that can be inflammatory in certain situations and, the types of language and ways to, interact with individuals so that it is de-escalating a situation instead of adding to the situation. And then, of course, through our trainings, we're going to be coming into contact and gathering information about different identification tools. There are a handful of different identification tools across the country. And what we have seen with a lot of organizations is they will take those identification tools and sometimes tweak it to what they need in their area. Because even though we have a good handful out there, and several of them are evidence-based, it may not exactly fit what's going on in your area. So don't be, afraid to tweak things to make sure that it matches for your area so that you can have those correct identification tools, because that's where your population, is really going to come from. It kind of, I've been to various states and, talked to various groups, court groups. And I've been to some places where, we're talking numbers and I'm like, okay, well, how many kids do you think you have here? And they're like, oh, well, I think we have 12. And I'm like, 12? You have a large city. I bet you have over 100. You just don't know who they are or where they are. So these identification tools are just as important as the trainings. So these all go together. I say this all the time. We're on a 100-lane highway. There are multiple parts to this. And so we got to come from multiple aspects and make sure that we have all of our pieces and people together. Next slide, please. So when you're working with these kiddos, one of the I think is a very important thing to know. And this is also young adults, right? You're going to see the same thing in young adults who have aged out of this situation. Dissociation. That dissociation can begin in their early childhood trauma. So they might already be, dissociating and have a sharpened ability to be able to move in and out of that dissociation by the time they get with their trafficker. That's not necessarily a positive. That gives the trafficker a lot more control over this teenager. And that's where we will see kiddos who might come into the court and they look like just the most sweetest, innocent, and they're talking all low and they're barely saying anything. But last night they were fighting two cops after they had stolen a car. And so these are some of the shifts, that we can see in kids, and it's related to that complex trauma. Whenever you experience complex trauma on the level and for the length of time that you do, you start to experience derealization and depersonalization because the world you're living in does not seem real. Because you have all of these things going on at the same time, the brain just cannot handle it. A lot of the times what we see in our teenagers and young adults is alexithymia, which is where they lose that ability to have that range of emotions to pull from. And so what you'll see is you'll see happy and angry, and not a whole lot in the middle. And so any interaction that they have is just going to go one of those two directions. Next slide, please. And so part of the reason that is because we start out as this individual that we're born to be, and we get all of these building blocks built into us, as a toddler. And then whenever we are abused, we start to build a different person. We start to build those protections. Our amygdala starts to go off. It starts to take more control of us. Then when we're with the trafficker, things really explode at that point, whether that trafficker is a family member or a boyfriend or somebody that you just met. You got to act a whole different way. You can't act the same way that you acted at home. You got a whole new set of rules, and the consequences to those rules are pretty great. So then, whenever you are with your trafficker, if you're under pimp control, if you're with him and a wifey, which is another woman being trafficked, that would be one of the titles that she would receive. That's how they would address each other. Then you got to be a whole different person. You got a whole different set of rules on how you have to act in front of that individual. And then whenever it's just you and the other girls, whole different set of rules. Yeah, you can relax a little bit, but you can best believe you're in competition and they will tell on you in a heartbeat if something goes down. So you're never able to relax in any of these situations. Then whenever you're around him and other individuals that are involved in trafficking and other pimps, it's a whole nother set of rules. You might have heard about girls not being able to raise their head up, keeping their eyes down to the ground, not being able to communicate with other individuals. A lot of that control, where they actually are making you control your body. They don't have to put a finger on you. You control your body. And this doesn't matter whether you're with a pimp or your family member or a boyfriend, you're going to have those same types of reactions. And then whenever you're with a buyer, you got to be a whole different person because you got to pretend like you like what's going on and you want more. So can you imagine being in a situation where you are being raped? You are being raped for money and you've got to pretend like you like it. Imagine the psychological damage that that does to an individual when that's happening multiple times a day. And then when you come in contact with your therapist, if you ever get to a therapist, then you've got a whole nother situation because you don't know if they can handle all this information that you're holding. You don't know how they're going to judge you. You don't know how they're going to respond or if they really have any true help to offer. Right. And so you're building this whole other person because you want to present well to them. Right. Um, I forgot one person in here. When you come in contact with law enforcement, you're not only are you a different individual, you got a whole different name, date of birth, social security number. Everything's different when you come in contact with law enforcement. I got to protect everything, not just who I am as a person, but everybody around me, where I came from, how I was connected to them. I got to protect everything. So I got to be a whole different person. Now, if I've got parents still, because sometimes in this we lose our parents, right? And sometimes we end up in this because we didn't have parents in the first place. And so if I get an opportunity to be with some parents, whether it's bio or foster, I got to be a whole different person because I want them to see the best side of me, even though I don't know what the best side of me is because I've got all these other people. So I'm just pretending the best I can to fit into whatever they're saying and whatever orders they're giving. And so I'm just shape shifting here. And then whenever maybe I'm in DCS custody and I'm in a different placement. And if I'm in DCS custody, I'm going to different placements all the time, whether it's that I got to go to a RTC, a residential treatment facility, and level down to a therapeutic group home, and then level down to a QRTP, and then level down to a regular group home. The amount of people that I have to be in that situation to protect myself, not only from the other kids that I'm placed with, but the staff that I'm placed with as well. And there's different rules at every house. So I'm a whole different person depending on what staff is on and what kids in the house. And then whenever I'm around friends, if I have any from my regular life, I'm trying to protect them from knowing what has happened in my life so I can have some kind of normalcy in my life. So then what do we even talk about? Because everything in my life is so different. And so then I have to, be this whole other person. And then even whenever I'm in the community, I still got to be somebody different because they expect something from me. And if they find out, they're going to shame me and I'm going to be ostracized from the community. So I have all this fear about all of this that I'm holding and how they think of me and will they help me? And if they do help me, is it out of pity? Am I going to owe them like I owed, right? And so whenever you get all of these together, this is what it looks like. This is what walks into your courtroom. You got all of these things going on in one kid, a kid who's in their formative years, trying to figure out who they are as a person. And so we have to come in with delicate hands, very delicate hands. Next slide, please. So the path to recovery. Number one, time. Whenever we are looking at, what do we do with these kids? We've gotten them into our courtroom or into our system. How are we going to help them? time is of the essence, right? We need to get them into services very, very quickly. But you can't complete treatment whenever you're still dissociating. And so we need to make sure that the length of treatment matches or gives the kid an opportunity to get out of dissociation so they can receive the treatment. And so what I've seen in the past is we'll send a kid to an RTC and 3 months later, they're like, oh, this kid isn't, it isn't fit for this program. And what the real truth is the kid is just now starting to come out of dissociation. And so they haven't been able to connect to the program. And the kid has to be able to buy into the program. And sometimes you just can't do it whenever you're so frazzled and you're dissociated. They got to have the right team members around them. Our strength court here was put in place to make sure that the teams that are assigned to these kids, whether it be a kid who is coming through a mental health agency or a kid who's in the Department of Child Safety, we want to make sure that they've got the right team members around them and all of the services available so that we can get them, also connected to their natural supports. Get them back out into the community so that they can start working on the things that trigger them, so that they can start building, the things that they need for the future, which is going to be those relationships and learning how to maintain the boundaries and things like that. Next slide. So and we're going to run through these real quick in probation and detention because some of these things I'm restating here. Number one, knowledge. And I think after you receive training, after you understand the complex issues that they're dealing with, then the belief, that these kids' trauma is real and it's not just drama. And that they really do come in fearful and they really do come, with all these dissociative issues. Making sure that the environment that they're in, whether it's in, detention or not, that they've got access to services. Making sure that, probation officers and detention officers are aware of recruiting efforts and what recruiting looks like, because some of the kids don't know that they're recruiting. They're just talking about what they've experienced. They're not necessarily trying to recruit. And so I think the more we understand that, the more we can help the kids reduce the recruiting, and the more we can help the detention officers and probation officers identify recruiting and nip it in the bud. And so it's really up to the courts to make sure, that all of these services stay in place. Next slide. Survivor inclusion is one way to have survivors involved in your courts, your organizations, your agencies, wherever it is that you're coming from. If you're survivor informed, that means that you're reaching out, you're attending these trainings, you're gathering information from the right kinds of places. Next slide. So that should say survivor led. And did we skip a slide? Yeah, survivor. Oh, there it went. Survivor engaged. That's what I was thinking.
My bad.
So survivor engaged is that next level. This is where you actually bring a survivor in on the planning or the program, whatever, have them involved on a contract level or hired as an employee or partnered with an organization. That way you got that constant flow of information. So survivor engaged is that next level. And then we have survivor led, which would be an organization like my organization, where the survivor is actually making all of the decisions in the organization. Next slide, please. So knowing whether a survivor is ready or not, because age doesn't mean they're ready. Okay, time out of the life doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready, right? These can be indicators that they should have, a better chance, but it takes a lot to, move through this situation and get to a point where you can actually effectively provide information going the other direction. Provide those trainings. It matters, how long they were, how long you were in the life, how long you experienced that, what type of therapeutic interventions, what kind of natural supports, that they are connected to, the community supports. And it really does matter if they are still connected to their trafficker. We have had a couple of situations, and there have been some people on the fence because I myself, my first child is with my trafficker. And so there are a number of us who have children with our traffickers. And sometimes when you have a child with an individual, you have to have, some kind of contact with that individual. That can be something that would trip up, a survivor, continuing to have that contact. And then also understanding what their PTSD response is. That way, if something is going on, and that's really for someone that they trust, so that if something is going on, there might be some indicators to help them, because vicarious trauma is really heavy. It's really, really heavy. And it's important that we all have self-care, because I think all of us deal with, really tough things, especially in the courts, reading some of those reports. And so that self-care is very important. Next slide. All right, that is all for me. I'm going to turn it over to Jordan, and he is going to give you a lot more information. And then we're going to have questions at the end. So if you have any questions right now, you can go ahead and throw them into the chat, so that you don't forget them, or you can write them down if you want to ask it later. We are monitoring the chat. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jordan. Go ahead, Jordan.
Thanks, everybody. Again, so my name is Jordan Masciangelo. I am a survivor myself, and I've been working in this field for since I was in my early 20s, way before I should have, to be honest. But folks like Shanna and I who do this kind of work, we have our own experience that we're bringing to this, right? But like Shanna said at the end about engaging survivors in what you do on those different levels, right? So it is really important that we have this work and that we're informing you folks to do the work that you need to do with what really happens. Because for a long time, people were doing the work without really even knowing what's going on, you know what I mean? And then that's the stuff just isn't effective. So we really appreciate the opportunity to do stuff like this, because it is not only meaningful for don't mean to be speaking for Shanna, but it's not only meaningful for us, it's beneficial for you and everybody else that you're helping. So thank you for being here. So for a long time, I was sexually abused as a child originally. And for a long time, that's all I sort of focused on. I didn't even clock that the trafficking was trafficking until I was a full adult, I was already out. So I didn't even really understand what was going on while it was going on at the time. And that is not a unique story for a lot of male survivors. So I want to sort of like break that down just a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about the historical erasure of male survivors. And again, none of this is to like erase anything about female survivors or anything like that. It's just to gain a new perspective of where a lot of the male and young male and male youth survivors are coming from. So it's a big scale issue. When I first started speaking about this kind of stuff, people still are so shocked to hear how prevalent and common it is for males to be trafficked. Because like Shanna said, we've got that TV version of what trafficking is. And while that does happen, that's like the smallest percentage of how it actually works, right? And like I said earlier, like 40% of, the United Nations put out their stats, and 40% of all identified human trafficking victims worldwide, both labor and sex trafficking, is 40%. So 40% of trafficking survivors are male. That's not 10%. That's not 20%. That's nearly half of the folks that we need to be helping are male identified. But the services and our awareness and the recognition doesn't match that 40%. So it's this global massive crisis. All trafficking is, but the men seem to be like hidden in plain sight. And the number is shocking just because for decades we've been like the entire trafficking framework, all the laws and the services, the advocacy has long been not exclusively, but narratively around female and women survivors. And not that that's a bad thing, but that's how our frameworks as in the anti-trafficking field were developed. So all the frameworks around the stuff we do are developed around females. So there's a lot of pieces to that that are missing the male component, and we just can't swap. A lot of times we can't just swap out what we do for females and what we do for men. They're not. There's a lot of things that are obviously intersectional and they overlap. It's not. You can't just like flip them. Next slide, please. So understanding the gendered forms of coercion against men or youth, male youth. Okay, I wasn't trafficked as a boy. I was trafficked as a teenager, an older teenager. And we need to understand, if we're going to understand how to help and identify these folks in the first place, then we need to understand how traffickers might target and control young men or boys and the tactics they might use, because they're incredibly sophisticated, and they're the tactics that trafficker will use on male youth. Those are the tactics are actually deeply gendered tactics in the first place. Like trafficker will weaponize masculinity and societals or societies wherever that's happening, what that environment is like. They will weaponize that against the young male. They exploit this lone wolf mentality thing that a lot of male youth have. The idea that a man is strong and self-reliant. For me, like my trafficker he presented as a savior at first, and then collected all the information he needed, and then to flip that on its head, and then use all of that against me to keep me in place. And I hadn't at that point. I had nowhere to go. This is again, this is not a unique story. They're not going after necessarily the rich white boy that's head of the football team. They're going after the gay, poor country boy who was living on the street at the time. So they use this silencing, this shame, because they know that for a male, and especially a young male, those ideals and those things that you hold close to, that you were raised with, are undeniably shameful if anything's going against those. Men aren't supposed to be victims. So and if you're raped or you're abused or you're something to do with sex and you're not in control as a man or as a young man or even as a boy, it's like the whole world, movies, music, TV, your dad, your family has always told you the opposite of that. You're not going to say a thing. And they know, the traffickers do know that, and they will weaponize that against you. And it'll silence you. They'll use economic pressure, especially if you're like on the street already. They'll exploit that traditional male role model stereotype as the provider. Oh, you're not the provider. You're the opposite. And then that all of those things are so shameful. They cause so much internal stuff with a young male that they can become compliant. Compliance is a lot easier in this kind of situation for a male. In any other situation, maybe not. But when it comes to being a victim of anything sexual, compliance is almost easy for the traffickers. And it does lead often for all young men or young males of all identities. It gives them this profound identity crisis, okay? Because they can't, maybe they are gay, but they're being trafficked by an older man. And then they're like, I was turned gay. I don't want to be gay. Or if that's what gay is, I'm not going to be that. That was my experience. If they're straight, it's the opposite. It's like, is this person turning me gay? Or they'll become maybe violently homophobic, or there's a lot of things that will affect them going forward in terms of identity. There's no sort of safe identity that you may have that is going to get you out of that identity crisis in the end. Next slide, please. So some of the unique barriers that we might face, I mean, again, this is not exclusive to male survivors or anything, but there is some significant things that I've sort of parsed out over the working with males over the years. The traffickers' tactics are external forces. They create a set of internal boundaries that are just difficult for these young men to overcome. And for us to, make it very easy for us to never come forward or never disclose anything. And it starts with socialization from your origin, wherever you came from, your family, or the world, the music, the era you grew up in. So we are taught from a young age. Males suppress their emotions. They don't show vulnerability. So when we're victimized, there's no sort of framework to sort of process how to make that go outward, which leads to a misperception that I didn't see myself as when I was being trafficked, or for much longer after, that I just saw it as like my own fault, or I was just participating in it, or I was just in a bad situation, or I was gullible. There was never every other word, but I've been taken advantage of, being exploited. What was coming into my head. There's also this language gap, and I don't mean this language gap between, different cultures or different ethnicities or anything like that. Young males don't have the language that we're talking about here, right? The words trafficking and me don't go together. No one's talked about it. It doesn't exist in the zeitgeist and culture generally. So they don't have the language to even talk about it. That was for me. I didn't say I'm a survivor of trafficking until I was almost 30. And that's because I thought I just had an abusive partner. And I didn't have the language to put together what had actually happened. And not that, that's confusing for everyone, but I had thought it only happened to women. And if it did happen to a male, I was this outlier, this one in a million kind of situation. For those of us who have experienced this, it's just confusion and shame of everything. And if you got aroused, forget it, because that must mean you're gay, or that must mean something, you like your trafficker or whatever. And when it comes to the overall stigma, people are just the stigma of male victimhood is so incredibly powerful that people will go to guys will go to the ends of the earth not to disclose. If you talk about that's why sometimes, and Shanna said that, when you see that woman walk into the courtroom and she's got 900 people living in her head at the same time, she can't necessarily remember which one is actually the real one anymore, because it's been years of that, and that's very much the same for men. Okay. But then they've got this, they've got to pick and choose which one of all the crazies they can even show, because which one will be too feminized. I can't do that. Oh, I'll pick the tough guy one. I'll pick the guy who's on the street in the gang. I'll pick this one, and then I'll just show you guys in the courtroom all of those ones. So that's why in the courts often you get men who are exploding, and it's just like Shanna said, anger or happy, leans more to the anger side with a lot of male, because that's all they've ever been socialized to express, is dominance and anger. Next slide. So trauma-informed legal and courtroom practices, they are essential because we need to create spaces where it's always going to be difficult, right? But we need to give these young guys the best chance possible that we can. So when a survivor does manage to a male survivor, break through some of these barriers or come forward, or he's been through, like Sean was talking about, found that he was been trafficked through other means or whatever is going on, that alone, their world is turned upside down, especially when they're young, right? Like in their formative years, like Shanna said earlier, all of that's happening when they should be worrying about what girl likes them at school. You know what I mean? And we've got to really down trigger. That's not a phrase. That's a phrase I just made up. We need to remove as many triggers as possible from the when they're out now. So from the courtrooms, how can we make the courtroom a place that is going to not re-traumatize them, right? And we're going to express anger. Male survivors are going to express anger, and that's a normal response. It's both a normal response, even if it was just a regular male teenager, they're going to be, crazy anyways because they're of their hormones. And it's a valid response. And I think a lot of the times we need to recognize that when we see some of these kids and they're going insane, we cannot fathom their behavior or their reactions, or it's completely unfounded. We have to remember that, we were once there too, survivor or not, we were that age too. And we have to kind of, when you're angry at your dog, this is not comparing humans to dogs, but you're angry at your dog sometimes they're not listening and you get down low and you talk to them, not in a condescending way, but we need to remember to get on the same level as these young people at sometimes, not to give them any kind of authority or anything like that, but to remember that where they're coming from, how soon did that just happen? Did they just live with their trafficker for 3 years and get ripped out and now they're in a courtroom? Because who would put yourself in that situation? Who would react anyway other than kicking and screaming? So we need to have that trauma-informed approach. And it's actually pretty essential to understand the trauma-informed principles and how all that stuff works. And I think, we need to not come at it from our adult, we know better brains, but we need to come at it from the other side. So I always think if a kid is being impossible or a young person's being impossible, even with me, I kind of flip to their side and like, okay, do the opposite of what I'm doing right now or how I'm reacting right now. I'm going to do the opposite and see how that works, because they will do it because they're scared, and they will do it because they want you away. They want to get out of there. They want to get out of that situation. So we need to shift, and we need to be malleable to do that. Okay, I know there's rules, there's the way things need to go, but the way we are reacting, the way we are talking to these young folks, we need to remember that we can shift too. Okay, we don't need to just. I know this is a courtroom is like an authority situation. We can do both at the same time. Next slide. Gender neutral programs often, like I said earlier, they default to female centric design. And I think that, and like here, federally funded orgs, for every 150 of them, there's one dedicated male program. Okay. Or with sex trafficking orgs. I work for Men Healing. I said earlier, I'm the creative director at Men Healing. We aren't a trafficking specific organization. We are a male survivor of any sexual trauma organization, but we are one of, I think, 3 in the country that works specifically with male survivors of sexual trauma. And that's just, it's hard. And we're not huge, we're tiny, and nobody knows about us in the first place. But it's hard for men to, and that reinforces these ideas that males aren't supposed to be in this space, but we are. And we need to reflect that in the work that we're doing. So we need to remember that we need to start opening doors for a lot of these young males, and not just saying, oh, you can come into a female centric or our rape recovery center that we have, Wednesday nights, we have men's night or something. We need to design or redesign services that we have with males in mind and their experiences in mind. Next slide. So create programming that authentically includes male realities. So how do we sort of fix some of these things? And how do we move from, like, me saying this to sort of authentic inclusion of some of these concepts? So the first thing is to just really be intentional. We have to move from just being aware that male survivors exist to sort of actively implementing that awareness. So that means speaking and listening to us, and what those needs are, what those programs might look like from the ground up that people are designing for us. Or we start to redesign things that we know already, and how we can apply that to a male survivor. And this is more about just opening doors and about sort of re-examining how we have been doing things already, from our intake processes to like therapeutic models, to how does this specifically serve a young male population, or how could this possibly be a barrier for a young man? And I always say at a lot of these things that I do, when I'm talking about trauma-informed spaces and things, about like if a young male youth goes into, does go into a rape and recovery center. First of all, the fact that they walked in the door is already, they're in the top 1% of people that are going to do anything. Okay. If they walk in there and they go into the bathroom and there's, a box of tampons, and then they go and they sit in the waiting room and there's, that Vogue magazine probably wouldn't be on the like, a bunch of girly magazines or whatever. And maybe they're a straight identifying young male. They're going to be like, this is not for me. Head right back out to the trafficker. And it's just we need to think in these kinds of terms. They seem stupid, they seem simple, or they seem trivial. But these things to a young person mean a lot more. Okay. They don't have this context that we have when we're talking. So we need to validate these guys' emotions. We need to let them be mad and help them understand that they can be other things. And then we need a safety plan. Like, we need to be practical with what's going to happen. Because we can't just all be warm and fuzzies and and because a lot of these young guys can get really violent. And we need to address where that violence is coming from, or where it's stemming from, instead of they are a criminal, they're bad behavior, they are, let's put them in detention, whatever that may be. Okay, we need to understand where it's coming from so we can address those to stop that violence. And then they need social connection. This like young lone wolf mentality thing, I can go it alone. And especially this nowadays, a lot of young men are doing this lone wolf mentality, or this, what do they call it? The male loneliness epidemic, or whatever. Whatever is going on in the world right now with that. These traffickers are going to, especially now, today, these traffickers are going to latch onto that, because that's their bread and butter. Their bread and butter is a lonely guy with nothing to lose. And seems to be a lot of those right now. So we need to create spaces where they can have social connection, where they won't be this lonely wolf, that it will be more vulnerable. Next slide. Train the staff without bias, discomfort, and pity. Okay, so men and boys and male youth don't want to be pitied. They don't want to be looked down upon. They don't want to be, because that just reinforces this 1 in a million idea. But we need to get everyone on the same page of how this works. And like Shanna said, again, coming to this sort of these workshops and these webinars, or going to a training, learning about male survivors, bringing male survivors into the work, understanding how these different frameworks work, because there's no one way to traffic someone either, right? There's a million different ways that this happens. There's a million different frameworks that this can occur in. And we need to be able to weave in and out of all of that, okay, if we're going to truly help these people. But we need male-specific training in all of this work too, and that goes beyond just coming to a single webinar or anything like that. Like, there's a lot more. We've got a long way to catch up to all the awesome work that's been going on in the anti-trafficking world with females. General trauma-informed care is great. Okay, but it's not necessarily enough. Men have been and boys have been sort of erased for so long that we kind of need to like overproduce, or not overproduce, overshoot a little bit right now at this point. We need to recognize all of that so that we can challenge that stigma. Next slide. We need to ensure that, I talked about this a bit earlier, that materials and the spaces and the environments are representing the population. So when you're looking at the space, when you're looking at the people in the room, okay, I said earlier, 40% of trafficking survivors are men or male identified or boys. Okay, so look at that room. Is that going to be comfortable for 40% of the people in here? This happened to me. I went into a service center in Toronto years ago. Obviously, I was much younger, and there was just only women who worked there. It wasn't necessarily a feminized space, but it didn't feel like a 18-year-old young man this was a spot for him. And what I do, I just went right back out into the street. We have to be intentional about this kind of stuff. Okay, we need to revise or relook at or pay attention to some of our intake policies and start using some more inclusive marketing materials, imagery that's going to include us. So we, eventually over time, we won't feel so isolated. We need to create these spaces that visually, men are visual people in general. They're going to see, if they see something, they believe it. That old stupid adage, if I see it, I believe it. With a lot of guys, that's very true. We can talk to them over and over and over again, but until they see it, they are not going to actually start paying attention. So we need visual representation across the board. Next slide. Again, provide these spaces where they're not isolated. How can we show them that they aren't one in a million, that this is a real problem? So connection and community for a young male, especially, is paramount. That's why they have this loneliness epidemic, because they can't do that which they should be naturally doing. So if there is an opportunity for a male survivor, somebody like that does the work that I do, that has lived experience, that means so much to a young person. Oh, that guy is a trafficking survivor too. Oh, that alone will like settle somebody down immediately, just knowing that they are literally not the only person that this has happened to. So we need to, but it's so, because of all of what I'm talking about here, that's so rare that we need to curate that for that person, for that young person. Next slide. Design these systems that feel intentional. Like, this is talking about what I talked before. We need to, take care of all of the survivor needs. But we need to have this support hub, a central point of contact where this young male can have access to their needs, the things they need, to housing and find work or healthcare, whatever, legal support, whatever that might be. To help them navigate all that through their lens, their socioeconomic, ethnic, cultural lens at the same time. Make sure that they have safe housing. There's every young male that I met when I was in the street as a teenager, straight, gay, any, whatever, none of them, I'd never met one of them who hadn't traded sex for something, whether that was drugs, food, somewhere to sleep, whatever. So we need to get these guys housed, like, somewhere safe to live. There's one safe house in this, I think, that I know of in this whole country for males survivors of trafficking, and there's like 6 beds. And that's a problem when 40% of the survivors are male. Trauma-informed care, we talked about that. And we need to move away from, like Shanna said earlier, out of the 101. We need to start being like, okay, we know male survivors are, if they're doing massive worldwide studies on this, that's a sign that we need to get into the next phase of actually doing something about it. We need to move past this, oh, male survivors exist. We need to make it actionable now. So we need to stop just talking about this problem and start actually building solutions for this problem and designing new systems that are going to work for everybody. And last one, I think. Yeah. So like Shanna said earlier, I think we've got time, right, to talk. Yeah, perfect. So we've got any questions you guys have. Again, don't want to speak for Shanna, but I'm pretty sure we're both pretty open books. Well, I am at least. So have at it if you want, and don't be
Definitely
shy.
open book over here.
Yeah, don't be shy. Either about the subject or about our own personal, well, my own personal experiences with trafficking or whatever. Okay.
Yes, the recording will be sent out probably in a couple of days, and it is recorded. So we will send it out to everyone who had registered. No problem.
I wanted to comment on a couple of the things that Jordan said when he was talking about, how intimidating it can be in a courtroom. One of the things that we do in our strength court here in Arizona is that the judges come down from the bench and they just sit across the table from the kids during the court session. It really, and I know that we've got a number of other courts across the country that do it that way in our traffic courts. It just really reduces that intimidation. And then, I know sometimes in our courts because the kids are represented, and so in some of the courts, the kids don't even get to speak. We have found that if you let them speak, they will tell you an immense amount of stuff, not only about their experiences, but also about their dreams, and about what they want to be, later whenever they grow up, because that's what what we're really here for is that restoration piece, and setting them up for their future. We also let them speak last. Because one of us may have said something, whenever it was our turn to speak, and they didn't think of that, or they want to comment on that or whatever. And that really gives them a voice in the courtroom, because they know that they're going to have more than one opportunity to speak. And, they know that everyone there is really, working towards their good. We still have to deal with, consequences sometimes when things happen. But whenever they are already accustomed to the therapeutic court, when we have to give consequences, we don't see a lot of the same reactions that we used to see in the past. To a kid receiving those consequences, we'll see kids, just really pushing through to get to the other side. So sometimes just a little thing like coming down from the bench, and maybe having a tray of, snacks that they can, eat while they're in the courtroom. It just gives a lighter experience, and we're not just, dealing with what they've got going on today. We are also reshaping for them how they feel about the courts in the future, because a lot of us are going to need the courts, at some point in time in our life. And I know adult survivors who avoid law enforcement and the courts, even when they need them, they avoid them because of their previous experiences. And so this isn't just about handling today, it is also about handling tomorrow and making sure that they feel comfortable with the justice system so that they can access it whenever they need it to work for them.
Anything legal or anything official for a lot of survivors, for me or other male survivors that I've known, is so scary. I would rather fight people in the street than have a bank account or any of those official things. To this day, I am still I had to take a money course just to learn how to like have a bank account and things like that. I'm scared of like the passport office. I'm scared of I don't have driver's license. I'm 41. I'll be 42 next week. I don't have a driver's license because anything that's official that has to go to the government in a letter, I am terrified of. And it's like I can't get rid of it. It's there for life. I can't. Cops, courtrooms. I did get, when I got out, I built up so much debt that I got served. Uh, uh, I was getting sued, and I needed to go bankrupt. That's I was terrified, like just as much as being trafficked. I was like, what? Because you didn't have an identity really for so long, or it was so attached to somebody else, and yeah, if everything feels like harm, anything that's official, that's the government, that's legal, just feels so like it's going to hurt you. And that carries on for so much long. So if these young people are having terrible experiences in court, or with law enforcement or whatever, that just like a tick in the back of their brain, and that's pushing forward. Like Shauna said, you know, we need to prepare them for the future. If they have this, a decent or good experience through the court system, how much that can help them going forward, you know, because these things are so intersectional, right? So, I don't have a driver's license when I'm 42 years old because I he threw me in the car once after in a fight, and now I'm scared to drive for the rest of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it can be a very scary situation because, the courts have the ability to take away your freedom.
Mhm.
And that is, one of the tools that's used against you, whether it's said all of the time in passing. It doesn't have to be repeated over and over. You'll remember it, someone who's in control of you, talking about their ability to take away your ability to have control over yourself. And so those factors, where the courts, unfortunately, um, kind of in the eyes of the victim can be aligned with the trafficker. So the trafficker took away my freedom. The courts can take away my freedom. The trafficker is able to consequence me. The courts are able to consequence me. The trafficker, I got to be afraid and reduce myself a little bit when I'm in front of him. And the courts, I feel like I have to be afraid and reduce myself. And so we want to challenge those myths, that have really been built in by trauma, and give these individuals, an experience that proves to them, and it's not going to be a one-time experience that does it, they're going to need multiple experiences in the court to prove to them that the courts are in their favor, and that the courts are working in their best interest and what's best for them.
Mhm.
We've got, I think, 13 minutes left. Y'all can just keep on listening to me and Jordan talk if you want to, because we can talk for days, literally. But if you have any questions, throw them up there. I know we ain't that thorough. We're pretty
Yeah.
thorough, but it's because we planned ahead. We thought about it, right? How many participants do we have?
We have 5 participants right now.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Oh, then you can just all show on your camera. We can all chat then.
Someone asked if we can get your contact information. Would you be able to throw your emails in the chat?
Sure.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks.
absolutely.
Like Shauna said earlier, there's a good handful of survivor lived experience consultants that do this kind of work. That what Shauna and I do with working with the NCJ FCJ. So I think that with the male survivors, I'm often one of the only ones on any kind of council or anything like that. And there are a handful of us as well. Maybe not as big of a handful, but there are some male survivors. We need more. We're trying to, but you just can't throw especially a young male survivor in. They're out, they're getting better. You can't throw them into this kind of work, or else then we're doing that re-traumatizing to them. They want it because it's so tempting. It's so enticing to take your trauma and turn it into a job or getting paid. People want to hear about it. So,
Yeah, I wish
yeah,
we had more on the juvenile side.
yeah.
So I and I think I was talking to Fedora about this a couple of weeks ago. Um, I have a contract here with the state of Arizona to work with juveniles and a lot of requirements to be able to get that contract. So that was a really big thing. As far as I know, we don't have any other survivor-led juvenile agencies.
Mhm.
We have
Hard to get funded.
that are working one-on-one with kids. We have some agencies that are doing awareness and things like that. But as far as I'm aware, we don't have any other survivor-led organizations that are working directly with kids, but we want more. And, we're growing here at Angels Go to Work. And, hopefully we can utilize this model and, use it in other states because it really does, not only does it help with identification, in our collaborative here, we constantly have right about 100 kids fluxing, 10 or 15 the other side. So as they're aging out, they're also coming in. And it's because our identification tools and because of our system of us working together. The West Coast identification tool is the one that we utilize the most here in Arizona. But it is about that identification piece. And so, depending on where you're at, if you're in a metropolis area, you should have somewhere near 100 kids. Because, and really, if you just look at the ads that are out there, and there are some organizations where, like the CEASE organization, CEASE, I believe they've done numbers in multiple cities where they're looking at the number of buyers in that city because and what they're using is online contacts. So they're tracking, how much they're pulling up these websites and things of that nature. But knowing and understanding the number of buyers in your community will give you a better picture of the number of victims in your community, because you got to have the right number of victims to be able to provide to those buyers. And then I've ran into some places where the courts are not quite connected with the behavioral health systems. Um, but where we see the courts, connected with the behavioral health systems, we see more identifications being made there because these kids can come in through other avenues. And they're experiencing the same trauma responses, the traditional trauma responses sometimes. Um, and so they can be identified that way as well. But if the courts aren't involved at all with behavioral health, then that kind of closes that door a little bit. So here in Arizona, if we identify someone, those high needs case managers that work in behavioral health are very aware of our strength system, whether it be the courts, DCS, or probation. And so then they're able to refer over. Because sometimes it might be behavioral health that uncovers a familial trafficking situation that might have looked like molestation initially. So it can look different ways, whenever it comes in, or maybe they have a kid that's constantly stealing from, this specific store. Well, what's going on in the area of that store? We had one kid that came in that she had three shoplifting arrests from the same convenience store. And that convenience store was on the corner of our main blade. And so that was an indicator that, hello, if she's in this area, it's probably happening to her. And then after, she was asked the right questions, in a trauma-informed way, she revealed that, in fact, she was experiencing trafficking, but if she was coming into the courts on a shoplifting issue, it was the location that gave it away for us. So that's another one of those knowledge issues, understanding in your area, where are the blades at? Where are kids being trafficked? Because you might have the opposite I had another case here where we had a juvenile trafficking a juvenile. And so as a trafficker, that young man was brought into the juvenile court systems. And so part of his um, sentence that he received included the locations of the blades in our city. And so he was restricted from being in any of those areas at all. If the courts were not aware of those areas, they would not be able to add that to his court consequences. And so sometimes those little things can be a protector, kind of protecting him from himself, because this young man had gotten involved with older pimps who were, kind of trying to school him on the game. Same thing that they do with young kids and, drug dealers, teaching them how to deal drugs. They pass these, businesses, if you will, on. There are internships on this side of things, okay? And so, just having that knowledge as the courts can be very important to not only identification, getting those services in place, but also that protection out there on the streets.
Thanks,
And
Shauna.
I remember,
Oh, sorry,
oh,
really
sorry.
quickly, Jordan.
Yeah, yeah.
We did have another
Oh, yeah.
question from Amy. She's from the Utah court. She wants to know if you will be able to do this training for her and her team, and if yes, she can send you an email afterward.
I mean, for juvenile courts,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
For both of you.
yes, it's so important that folks are getting. I have a nephew who's just he was 16. He was mentally unwell and he got in some trouble. And the way he went through the system, because he was like this big tough guy who was 16, I was like, it was crazy. That's why this stuff is so important to talk to people who are working with young people, because that's setting you up for the rest of your life, especially when you're in that like later, like 16, 17, 18, and he's just like a cisgender white guy who's like, and they threw him into, this, his roommate was like had killed 3 people. I'm like, he'd never been in trouble before. So I'm just like, this is not how this is setting him up to just go big in and out, in and out, in and out of these systems. And I'm like, I can't, it really opened my eyes to what can happen to young folks when we're not doing our best on our side of things to identify what's actually going on or how this happened, why this happened. So this is really important. So, talking with juvenile courts, that's why we work with NCJFCJ, because this is so important with a lot of this stuff, because it starts young. And I will say one other quick thing for a lot of them, this isn't, again, not exclusive, but male survivors tend to run it like a bit older, because traffickers, if they either get them when they're real young, like when they're really young, or they get them when they're that very, I don't know what my life is going to be stage, because young men turn inward, you turn inward at that point. That's the easiest time to sort of, for traffickers to catch them. If they are gay or something, they're starting to think about that when they're 13, 14. And that's also the time when they get the angriest. I have a son, and he's an adult now, but when he was 16, he was a nightmare, and he was fine living at home in his nice bedroom with going to his private school. You know what I mean? So it's like, he was already a nightmare. So you got to think of, like, if you got kids, think of how the normal teenage years are, then add out 3 lifetimes of terrible experience on top of that. And so it's so important for these youth, for us who are helping these youth, understand them and how it actually is for them. And I think that's how we make this better, how we help these kids, is just realizing that we can't be adults telling them how it should be or how it should have happened. We need to listen.
Great.
I think just one last thing, Fedora, and I think Jordan, kind of touched on it. We need more male role models for these kids to see. One of our, court, we have 2 courts here, they're both straight courts, one in the east, one in the west. And judges have rotation and stuff. And so we were going to be bringing in a male judge and an African American male judge. And there were some concerns about, triggering and because of the media myth that, a lot of traffickers are African American, which is not true. And I was asked about it, and I said immediately, yes, we need male role models in front of these kids that have that integrity and character that needs to be displayed in front of them. We tend to run heavy on the female side of things with service providers. Just traditionally, it's a female oriented career. But I've seen that we can sometimes see more men on the court side of things. And so that is a beautiful thing to be able to have, men in place so that they can see positive role models and that this is something that they could achieve in the future as well.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Shauna and Jordan, for presenting today. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.